Welcome to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. If you have problems with the IRS, don't focus on the negative, focus on the solutions. With the IRS Solution Attorney, Darrin T. Mish. For over 15 years, he's been helping taxpayers with IRS problems reclaim their lives and their financial stability. Now, here's your host of the IRS Solution Attorney Show, Darrin T. Mish.
Good morning, and welcome to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. I am the IRS Solution Attorney, Darrin T. Mish, and I'm here today with my lovely and talented co-host, as always.
That would be me, Katrina Madewell. Welcome to the show.
How are you today?
I'm doing fantastic. No complaints.
Are you fired up to talk about IRS problems?
Oh, yes. I make this conversation fun, because, I always have to chalk you up as the boring attorney.
And you're not shy about taking credit for that either, right?
And plus, I can say stuff that attorneys can't, so that's the beauty of the show.
That is, in fact, one of the beauties of the show is there are things that I can't say because I can get in trouble for things when I exercise my free speech rights, unlike most Americans. So the topic
when you're an attorney, you just violate that, which, by the way, you're listening to the IRS Solution Attorney, and we forget, Darrin, that this might be the first time that someone has ever chimed into the show.
Wow.
And so if it's your first time ever, we want to say welcome. Thank you for listening on Money Talk 1010. Thank you for listening to the IRS Solution Attorney Show, and I promise you the shows will bring you some value.
Let's talk about a little bit for just a second about why I am the IRS Solution Attorney. I'm a tax attorney, and I've been helping people solve IRS problems for right about 16 years. And it's really my passion, as the IRS can really kind of throw you for a loop and can ruin your life if you don't deal with them correctly. And what I do is I help make problems disappear when I can, So the topic for today's show is 5 facts about IRS problems that keep you up at night.
Yeah, we won't say that'll.
That'll, no. It's not 5 IRS problems that will keep you, that'll keep you up at night. It's 5 problems that do keep you up
currently
at night.
do, yeah.
Yeah.
Darren's going to help you fix those.
So the biggest one that I think is it's really the pain point for most folks is
going to the slammer, baby.
Yeah, they're worried about going to prison. And I don't think that's an unreasonable fear. It is after you kind of are educated about what's going on.
Well, think about this, Darrin. Like, you have to step out of the attorney box for a minute and go, okay, this client that's coming into my office, they owe $50,000, $100,000, $500,000 in back taxes they haven't filed in 20 years. Of course they're scared they're going to go to jail.
Yeah, like I'm saying, I don't think it's an unreasonable fear. It's just not something that most people that I come into contact need to be that worried about. Just this week, I actually had lunch with an attorney who used to be counsel for Department of Justice. He worked in the tax division, and we talked about, well, why do people get prosecuted for tax crimes, and why don't more people get prosecuted for tax crimes?
How did that conversation go? That probably should have been like an on-air lunch.
Well, he actually may be a guest in the future. We talked about having him on the show because I think he could impart a lot of value to our listeners, to our audience. But one of the things we talked about is that there's just so many non-filers out there that there's no way that the U.S. government even has the resources to prosecute them all. So a non-filer is just somebody, frankly, who hasn't filed a tax return
in a year or more.
In any given year. And typically, folks that come into my office, they haven't filed a tax return in, 5.
Your average client, is it 5 years?
5, 10,
is it?
20.
Like, have you ever done the averages? Like, every time you get them,
40.
You run that into the average to see what that number is?
It's usually about 6 years.
Okay.
So, there's probably people listening right now, and they're like, oh, my goodness, they haven't filed a tax return in 6 years?
I know. And how can I get away with that?
All right, so let me
we're not endorsing it.
No, we're definitely not endorsing the failure to file tax returns for sure. But let me go back and tell that short story that I love so much of the gentleman who came into the office. He was an older guy, and he was trembling. And, one of the things that I like to do is I really like to put people at ease, because it hurts me to see people that are upset or in pain or anything like that. So he's trembling. He's so nervous. I said, okay, so what's the problem? He says, well, I haven't filed a tax return in a long time. I got a big smile on my face.
That's a long time to you.
Because I know I can fix that. And there's a lot of things in the practice of law that are relative, right? So he says, I haven't filed a tax return in a long time. So I'm thinking, okay, this could be anything from, a year to like forever. And I said, okay, so how long has it been? He says, well, since 1960 when I got out of the Army. And I kind of smiled, and I probably laughed because I was born.
You weren't even born then.
I was born in the late 60s. And So I got really fired up and excited because I knew there was a way that I could help this gentleman. There's a statute of limitations for the misdemeanor offense of failure to file a tax return, and that happens to be 6 years. So we just had to file 6 years tax returns for this gentleman, and we ended up getting it worked out. He was thrilled because he spent the better part of his life, freaking out, stressing, and having high anxiety that the IRS was going to show up and throw him in jail. Now, listen. If that guy who didn't file a tax return from 1960 to 2005 or whatever didn't go to jail, the odds of you as a non-filer who's missed 2, 3, 5 years, whatever, probably not going to happen.
Well, the important part is only 6 years back is all they go. So if it's been 10, 20 years, it doesn't matter. They're going to wipe all that away.
All right.
So I've seen, I had a client, actually, she bought a property in her daughter's name because her mom hadn't filed tax returns in 20 years. And she was a W-2 wage earner employee. So really, she should be getting a refund.
Yeah, I've had a lot of W-2 wage earner type folks who were entitled to refunds and not file. One guy is actually a good friend of mine.
How do you think that started? Do you think they were self-employed or something at one point and owed some money for something and then just got scared and never filed?
Well, I'll tell you the story of my friend that I'm thinking about right now. He works at one of the bigger boat supply places here in town, and he's a W-2 wage earner. He's worked there forever. And we got to talking one day, and he says, I'm a non-filer. I just don't like the IRS. I don't like the government. I just don't want them knowing about my business. I'm like, dude, you're getting a W-2. They already know everything.
You're getting money.
All you're doing is leaving money on the table because people don't realize this, but there's actually a 3-year statute of limitations for refunds. So what that means is if you file your return more than 3 years late and you're entitled to a refund, you're not getting the refund. So you're just leaving money on the table.
Roxanne actually talked about that before the show. She was saying how she read an article or report where people leave a lot of money on the table every year, which is exactly what we're talking about.
That's true. So then it makes you wonder, okay, what's the government doing with all that money left on the table?
Oh, definitely.
Right?
They're definitely spending it. That's the answer to what they're doing with the money that's left on the table. See, the government's only going to hassle you for non-filing if they think you owe them money. They can tell almost as easily that they don't owe you money.
So they really don't care if you're getting money and you're not filing, right?
Yeah, they're not gonna knock your door down trying to get you to file a return when there's a refund due, particularly if it's been less than 3 years.
And they usually know, they have an idea if you'd be due a refund or not.
Yeah, I think so. If you're making $40,000 as a wage earner and you got a lot of money withheld, and they can kind of tell if you're going to get a refund or not, and they're not going to bother you about it.
So out of all the people you've represented in all these years, since this is the first part of the topic is imprisonment, have any of them went to jail?
No. Not one has gone to jail.
Not one client that's owed a lot of money to the IRS has went to jail.
Now, on rare occasions, and this is not lawful, but
I was just asking about your.
Yeah, none of my clients have ever gone to jail. None of my clients have ever been seriously threatened with going to jail. I've had a couple clients who didn't obey, administrative summons, which is where a revenue officer who's a bill collector at the IRS sends a summons to the taxpayer saying, come into my office, bring your papers. Okay, that's a summons. I've had a couple more than a couple over the years threatened with, going to court and potentially being thrown in jail for not obeying the summons. You see the distinction? The summons.
It's almost like getting subpoenaed to court and you ignore the request and you don't show up.
Yeah, and federal judges take a very dim view of people who just, don't
ignore
obey
the problem.
Summons. Because really, if you're a taxpayer who is ignoring a summons, what you're doing, sort of, is you're thumbing your nose at the court itself. And judges don't play.
What's the likelihood that they just don't open any mail from the IRS? I'm just saying.
Happens all the time.
So and there's a summons just mixed in there?
So we have somebody else in the studio, one of your assistants, and she just raised her hand. She's one of these people who doesn't open the mail from the IRS. But the story is, or actually the truth is, that, okay, so maybe there's bad news in that envelope from the IRS, but it's worse to not know about the bad news.
Well, you know what the bad part is now? Honestly, I really almost don't even open any mail because the kids get it. I don't have any bills, so what I do have is electronically paid, and I really just don't get mail. It's all junk.
Well, and these millennials, right? I mean,
they definitely don't look at it.
They don't even know what mail is. It's there's
email? Is that what you mean?
There's papers that get delivered to the house,
and people pay money to do that.
Yeah, exactly. So. None of my clients have ever been actually, threatened with prison. When I was talking to the gentleman who used to be the tax division attorney, what he said is, prosecutors aren't really in the business of prosecuting people for misdemeanors because it's not really interesting. It's not dramatic. It's not really that fun. So the crime of failure to file a tax return, which is the most common, quote, crime that I see in my practice, that's that's really not something they're going to prosecute that person for unless it's part of some larger criminal conspiracy. So you're a drug dealer. Yeah, you might get popped for failure to file tax returns. You actually might get popped for
a lot more than that.
Filing fraudulent tax returns. That's actually filing
worse.
Fraudulent tax returns is a felony. Not filing is a misdemeanor. So it's just like these big profile cases, high profile cases that you see, not necessarily tax cases, but like Martha Stewart. What'd you get in trouble for?
I don't even remember.
Lying
Was that
to
what
the
it was?
FBI. You know, what is Hillary Clinton very likely to be charged with? Not all this email stuff.
Mm-hmm.
She's going to be interviewed, if she hasn't already, by the FBI, and they're going to get her for lying because there's no way. Well, try not to be overtly political here, but she's probably going to be caught in some misrepresentation at some point in time.
And on that note, it's about that time. It's a real good time for a break. You're listening to the IRS Solution Attorney Show with Mr. Darrin T. Mish, and I'm your co-host, Katrina Madewell. When we come back, we're going to talk about number 2, which is wage garnishment.
Scary.
Back in a minute. Welcome back. You're listening to the IRS Solution Attorney Show
with Mr. Darrin T. Mish, the IRS Solution Attorney.
I'm your co-host.
Love to refer to myself in the third person.
Yes, I know. I like it too. Well, you know, when people are listening to the podcast, it works out. I'm Katrina Madewell. I am not the attorney of the show, but I'll be the one here keeping it real, keeping it fun, and, you know, saying the stuff the attorneys can't.
But did you sleep at a Holiday Inn Express last night? That's the question. Probably
I don't
not.
think so.
Probably not. Probably slept at your own house, right?
Probably get in trouble if I slept at a Holiday Inn Express last night. I'm just saying.
So number 2 on our show today, the topic of the show is 5 facts about IRS problems that keep you up at night. The second one that we're going to talk about today is wage garnishment. I mean, technically, the technical legal term is an IRS wage levy. Okay,
But the same thing?
yeah, a levy and a garnishment are the same thing. You just have to remember that a levy is different than a lien. And a lot of people use those two terms interchangeably. We're going to talk about
They sound
both.
the same.
Yeah, and they both start with a L-E, right? So actually one starts with a L-I. But anyway, they both start with a L. And so people get them confused. But levy means a seizure, okay? So if it's a wage levy, then it's a wage seizure, right? Not a seizure like an epileptic seizure, but like a seizure like you...
Come take.
Yeah, you're supposed to get your paycheck, and lo and behold, there is no paycheck, or there's a dramatically reduced paycheck. A lot of people don't realize how dramatic it can be if you get a wage levy.
Like seizure, do they actually really ever come get stuff out of your house when they threaten to do that?
Well, that's actually one of the that's actually, I think, number 5.
Oh, it is? Okay, so don't skip it.
We'll talk about it. It does happen. It's kind of rare, but it does happen. But in this context, a wage garnishment can be really draconian. That's a fancy word. It's really serious and severe. So I'm going to give you an example. You can actually look, if you're worried that you might get a wage levy or a wage garnishment from the IRS, you can actually download publication 1494 from the IRS's website. And what that is, it's a chart to tell you how much of your paycheck is exempt from the levy. Okay? So here's what this means. I'm going to give you an example.
I was going to say, a lot of people like me are listening to this going,
okay, so
redo. Eyes glazing over.
Probably most people get paid twice a month, right? That's semi-monthly.
Let's say 15th and 30th.
Yeah, so it's semi-monthly. And if you were a single person and you got paid twice a month, you get to keep $431.25. Doesn't matter how much you make. That's how much you get to keep if there's an IRS wage levy in place. I mean...
That's not even enough to fill up your own F-150, Darrin.
Well, it's a 350. But anyway, you're right.
Well, your big truck. Like, that couldn't get you gas for the month, is my point.
Yeah. So it's $431.25 that you get to keep as a single person if you have an IRS.
That's for
wage
everything?
levy.
For food,
that's for everything.
Shelter, clothing?
And so, really, most of the time, an IRS wage levy is not so much to get the money. It's actually what the IRS is doing sort of figuratively is imagine them grabbing you by the shoulders and shaking you.
Wake up!
Kind of like the shaken baby thing, but to you as an adult. All they're trying to do is they're trying to get your attention. It's like, hey, we're serious and we don't play. And So 9 times out of 10, if you have a taxpayer who's just been like AWOL and, the IRS can't get in touch with them, they're trying to, the IRS is trying to contact them, but the taxpayer won't get in touch with them, they'll go ahead and do the wage levy and they'll figuratively shake them, and that will generate a phone call almost guaranteed, right? Because at that
These are
point,
the frantic calls you get most of the time.
Yeah, and actually they're my least favorite, to be honest, because if you have let your case get to the point where there's an IRS wage levy and you have unfiled returns, for example, we don't have a lot of leverage because I can't get the levy released until we file your returns. Kind of makes sense that that's the policy, right? What does the IRS want? They want you in the system. They want you fully compliant. They want all the missing returns, at least 6 years, say, filed. And that's what they're going to require, that you file those missing returns before they release the wage levy. That's like point of negotiation number one. So if you've waited to get to call me, for example, until you've got a wage levy and you have unfiled returns and you have no money saved, then we got a problem, because you're going to ask me to go ahead and, do all this work on the front end to take care of you. And,
to represent you.
And I'm at this point, it's not all about me, but I'm taking all the risk that you're actually going to follow through with your obligation to take care of your financial obligation to me. And how do you think that works out?
I mean, I don't know. I'd be saying, can you sign a mortgage maybe?
Yeah, it doesn't really work out, because when you put somebody in that kind of desperation mode, they're going to make promises that maybe in their heart they intend to keep, but they don't keep. So it really creates some friction between attorney and client at that point.
But at that point, like if you've let it get to that place, you need to sell something. I'm just saying. It's time to sell something.
Maybe.
You should be selling something to pay your attorney so they can get you out of that hole.
Yeah, so the IRS can go ahead and garnish your wages without first getting a judgment. Like in most states, for any other creditor, they have to go to court, they have to get a judgment, and then they collect on the judgment. But the IRS is actually exempt from those laws. They do have to follow some laws. They have to send you by certified mail to your last known address. That's important. They have to send a final notice of intent to levy to your last known address.
And I imagine a lot of times they get it back, right?
Well, if you haven't filed a tax return in 10 years and you don't live at the same place you lived at last time, what are the odds you're going to get that notice? I mean, you're not going to get the notice because they don't know where you live. Particularly in Florida, we have a very, very transient population. That's good for you as a real estate agent, right? I mean, we move around a lot.
Get a lot of reloads.
There's other states.
People get bored where they live.
Like California, for example, people don't move. There's a Proposition 13 there where, your property taxes are grandfathered in, like for life. But if you move, they recalculate and then they explode. They go through the roof. So in California, nobody moves.
They do that here too, but we have portability and you can take that with you.
Yeah, they don't have portability there because
we just got that. Like when the housing market was bad and things. Well, actually, let me rephrase that. When it was good and it was on the upswing, a lot of people did not want to move for that reason because their taxes would be too high.
Right.
So they created the portability exemption. And it's still there.
So the IRS has to send the taxpayer, a final notice of intent to levy. They change the letter numbers on these all the time. Right now, it's an LT11. It used to be a letter 1058. But now it's an LT11, and it gives you appeal rights. You have 30 days to appeal. If you do not appeal, then you are subject to potentially being levied, either a wage levy or a bank levy, which we haven't really talked about yet. But those things are potentially going to happen to you. And so it's important, if you get a final notice of intent to levy, that you either appeal or you contact an attorney or you do something about it. Otherwise, it's very likely that when you go to look at your bank account on payday, you're supposed to get the direct deposit. You're going to have $431 there instead of whatever you're supposed to make.
Is that the difference? What's the difference between the wage garnishment and the bank levy?
Okay, so a bank levy is when the IRS, again, sent you a final notice of intent to levy, you did not appeal, then the IRS can levy your bank account. They can seize your bank account.
They do both usually? You think they swoop your bank account and garnish your wages?
It's extremely common to do both at one time. Again, they're trying to grab you by the shoulders and shake you like, hello.
And at that point, they're not going to want to put any more money back in the bank, which is another good point. Because I would think if they swoop my account, I'd be scared to put anything in there.
Yeah, well, bank levies are kind of interesting. A lot of people think that your bank account is frozen. I hear that term all the time. Almost every time a bank levy comes up, someone says, my account's frozen. Well, yes and no. It's frozen for that day that the levy is processed. But the next day, it's no longer frozen. You can still put money in the account. The IRS is not supposed to do successive bank levies. So they're not supposed to levy you, on Monday and then levy you on Tuesday and then levy you on Wednesday. They're not supposed to do that. I've only seen it happen once where a revenue officer did it like every couple weeks or every month. and we got that taken care of eventually. But the scary thing about bank levies is they don't want to give that money back.
No, I imagine not. They already got it. Why would they?
So the IRS has to wait 21 days while the bank holds the money to give the taxpayer the right to, try to get the money back.
So they don't actually get it. The bank's just holding on to it.
The bank holds it for 21 days. And then if you can't convince the IRS to release the bank levy, then the IRS gets the money. Now, again, 9 times out of 10, when a client or a prospect gets a bank levy, I say, okay, they're all upset, and rightfully so. But I say, well, how much money was in the bank? And 9 times out of 10, we had a client this week, it was $166. And she's, upset and freaking out about it. And we're like, it's $166. It's going to cost more for us to go fight over $166 than the money's worth. So that's fine. So what I usually tell people that have tax problems, big liabilities, and they're potentially could be levied, I tell them just keep minimal money in the bank until we can get some kind of stabilized situation going on here so that we can get this worked out.
And so we're going to move on to number 3, but it's going to be a longer conversation, so we really can't start it yet. But you're listening to the IRS Solution Attorney Show, and with Mr. Darrin T. Mish, if you want to reach him or any of this topic has sparked your interest or you have some questions, you can reach him at 888-GET-MISH, 888-GET-MISH.
888-438-6474. That's 888-438-6474 if you don't like to spell out words on your phone like me. Or you can visit our website at getirshelp.com. The recordings of the show are also there on the website, or you can find them on iTunes as well.
Just search for the IRS Solution Attorney Show, and he's on Twitter at Darrin_Mish.
And we just found out that actually our Android app for the show just got approved, and our Apple iTunes app is coming just any day now.
Awesome. We'll be back in just a minute. Stick around.
Are you suffering from IRS problems? Do you owe back taxes you can't pay? Is your paycheck or bank account being levied? Or maybe you haven't filed tax returns in years and simply don't know what to do. This is Darrin T. Mish to tell you that if you're tired of IRS problems hanging over your head and are ready for a fresh start, we may be able to help. Call the law offices of Darrin T. Mish at 888-GET-MISH, 888-GET-MISH. I can help you file old tax returns, work to release tax liens or stop wage levies, even negotiate deals to pay off back taxes at a discount, sometimes for pennies on the dollar. Hey, let's face it, these days it's not hard to get into tax trouble. A divorce, failed business, health problems, you name it. The point is, IRS problems may be solved if you're willing to take the first step. Call for a free consultation at 888-GET-MISH. That's 888-438-6474. Or go to the web at getirshelp.com, because the one sure thing is, IRS problems don't solve themselves. So get Mish. 888-438-6474. Principal Office, Tampa.
Welcome back. You're listening to the IRS Solution Attorney Show with Mr. Darrin T. Mish.
That'd be me.
I'm your co-host, Katrina Madewell.
So today we're talking about 5 facts about IRS problems that keep you up at night. And we just got done with wage levies and bank levies. This is all kind of in order of severeness.
The
right?
number one fear is imprisonment.
Yeah, the first thing we talked about was imprisonment. The second thing we talked about is, losing your paycheck, losing your money. That's pretty
Swiping
serious.
your bank account.
Have you ever thought about this? If you were a bad guy, if you were a dictator who was actually, ruling the United States, how would you deal with a population? How would you enslave a population? Well, I've thought about this a lot because apparently I have a lot of free time.
I was going to say I've never even thought of that question.
The way that I would do it, instead of going out and trying to round people up and throwing them in camps or whatever, I would use the IRS. I would. Because if you take somebody's money, then you take away their ability to, shelter themselves, feed their family, and
At
that
least
kind of
for
thing.
our society and our culture, because we're not third world.
Exactly. Exactly. And there's too many people and too many guns in this country to actually kind of forcibly take it over. Yeah. That's not going to happen. But you could, in fact, use the IRS if you were so inclined. And I'm not accusing anybody of doing this at this point, okay? But it could easily be done, as you would just go ahead and stick the IRS on your enemies, or an entire political class of people.
How many revenue officers and IRS people do you think would actually quit their job?
I don't know. I don't think that many, honestly.
You don't?
I don't, because I think that, and boy, I'm going to get some hate mail for that.
I'm just curious.
I think that if it was explained in a palatable sort of way, to the rank and file, I think they would just go ahead and go along with
Go with
it.
the flow.
You know, they have a pretty good gig. They get paid pretty well. They didn't used to, but they get paid pretty well. And if you count their benefits and everything else, they're doing very well. They're doing above average for an American worker. So I don't know. When you start to ask government employees to do the right thing versus, you know, feed their own families, that might be a pretty hard choice for some people. I don't know.
Imagine that.
And we kind of got off on a tangent, but
number 3.
penalties and interest is what we're supposed to be talking
Yes,
about.
we're getting there.
Instead of, you know, dystopian American society.
Right. We got a couple extra minutes. It worked out.
So, you know, most of the time what I hear from clients that come in, they say, you know, Darrin, I'd like to pay the tax bill, but it's the penalties and interest that are killing me. You know, they say that's what they say. And then I say, okay, well, your entire bill is $50,000. The tax is 25. Penalties and interest are 25. Are you ready and prepared to write a check today to the government for 25,000? I usually get this blank stare, like, "What are you, an idiot?" You know. So people say their problem is with the penalties and interest, and I agree they have a problem with the penalties and interest, but it's not the only problem.
But the other part too, and we've talked about this on the show, and this is why I mentioned it earlier in the show. If you're getting a tax refund, you don't even have that. Right.
So if you're getting a refund, then there's no penalty for late filing, and there's obviously no penalty for failure to pay.
They're not going to pay you interest.
Right. Well, there are some rare circumstances, but not if it's your fault that you haven't filed the return. You know, if you file an amended return later and you have a larger refund, then you probably are going to get some interest, but that's a different story. So, as a general rule, IRS interest and penalties actually double about every 6.5 years or so. One of the things that people don't realize is that, you know, the interest.
Is that to try to catch up for the prior 6 years in case then when you start filing?
Well, I think it's just, again, to create a tax system that there's so much incentive to file and pay on time that, you know, a larger, you know, percentage of the population will actually do it.
Yeah, because the reality of it is without, you know, the IRS and paying the money into the government, we wouldn't have the government we have.
Well, that's true.
Our whole society and genetic makeup as a country would not work as it does.
And never mind, that might be a good thing that we don't have all the government that we have now, but that's not what you said.
That's not the topic for the show.
That's not what you were talking about. So one of the things is that interest rates are really low right now, right? And even the IRS interest rate is 3%. And that sounds very reasonable, right? I mean, what's an average mortgage loan right now going for? A little over...
Low 4s.
Yeah, low 4s, high 3s, something like that. So the IRS interest rate is only 3%. That looks really pretty attractive, and it doesn't look that draconian, but it's compounded daily. Oops.
Yeah, compound interest is where rich people get richer.
Yeah, so the interest is 3% right now, compounded daily. And penalties are compounding daily. Yeah. And so you're paying penalties.
Mortgages, by the way, are simple interest. They're not compound interest anymore.
So you're paying penalties on penalties that you had yesterday, you know, and so on and so forth. You can actually max out the penalties at some point, and it's relatively early in the process. So what happens is the penalties spike at the beginning of a tax problem, and then they sort of level off. So that's good news, I think. There are ways to get rid of penalties. There's not really ways to get rid of interest. There are some. One of the ways to get rid of interest, come to think of it, is if you relied upon erroneous written advice from the IRS, then you can have interest abated.
Okay, what does that mean?
Okay, it means written advice from the IRS that's actually wrong, and then you relied upon it to your detriment. Okay.
So that might be a letter you find in the pile of rubble that they've ignored.
No, it's actually even more unlikely. This is a situation where you've written to the IRS and you've asked them for an opinion on your particular situation, and they've written you an opinion letter that says, okay, you can take, you know, a certain position on your taxes, and then they renege and change their mind.
Okay.
So this is exceptionally rare.
See that
it's
ever really.
It's so rare that we don't even talk about the, you know, elimination of interest. Now, penalties.
It's one of those things you can't say never, but it really pretty much virtually never happens.
Right. Remember, you're talking to a lawyer here, so I have to like waffle.
There's always something.
All the exceptions and stuff. But, you know, penalties can be abated. That's a fancy word for eliminated. Okay.
Waived.
Yeah. Penalties can be waived in certain situations. One of the ones that's kind of cool that's going on right now is there's something called first-time penalty abatement.
So that's if you have all these penalties that have stacked up and you've never asked them for any forgiveness, they say, okay, yeah, we'll forgive you. Is that basically what you're saying?
Kind of. So in first-time penalty abatement, it's actually not your first time in your life. It's just the first time in the last 3 years. Okay. So if you have 3 years prior to the year in question where you were fine, you filed your return, you paid, and you owed less than $100 in penalties, then they will go ahead and waive, that 3rd year penalty and just wipe it out. And all the interest that was on the penalty will also go as well.
Go with it.
So, and this is really,
sweet deal.
Yeah, it's a really good deal. And it's, for my clientele, it tends to be kind of rare because I tend to represent self-employed small business owners, and they, chronically have a problem, filing and paying on time. But if you find yourself in that situation, it can be really cool. I actually had a client where he had a stellar personal filing track record, and he ended up owing a penalty of like $45,000 for this 1 year. And he asked me if I could take care of it. I told him about the first time penalty abatement situation. He says, well, I still want you to handle it. We called the IRS and we got him to waive it. So that's pretty neat.
That's awesome. Number 4, is it time to move on? You got something else to share on that point?
Real quick, we're going to talk about reasonable cause for penalty abatement as well. So reasonable cause means the taxpayer had a darn good reason that they didn't file or pay on time or whatever.
What's an example of a good reason and an example of a not good reason?
A not good reason is actually easier because it covers most people. A not good reason is I didn't have the money. That's really
that's a pretty good reason to me. But I guess the IRS doesn't think so.
That's the typical reason. But I usually say fire, theft, flood, hurricane, divorce, drug addiction, alcohol addiction, gambling problem. It's got to be, or death sometimes can be, not the death of the taxpayer, but the death of a family member close to the taxpayer. But really what happens is a lot of times people have this sort of catalyst event, this big thing that happens. Like let's say it's a death of a child. Okay.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
That's going to send the parents into like a tailspin, right? It's going to take them a while to get over that. And the IRS is going to be willing to forgive 1 year. But what can happen is that 1 year of non-filing or late filing kind of sets off this track record, this habit of either non-filing or super late filing and not paying, whatever. And so you can see the catalyst happen in year 1, but the problem went on for 10 years.
So
IRS is not going to forgive the penalty.
Sometimes it's a late event that just unfortunately created this chain of events.
Yeah, so it's really sad because a lot of times what happens is the IRS, so the person doesn't file a tax return, say, and then the IRS really doesn't do anything about it. And before you know it, you're in year 2. And then the person's like, well, I didn't file in year 1, so I don't know what to do. And
life goes by fast.
Yeah, before you know it, it's year 8, and you owe $100,000 to the IRS, and now it's a problem. So the IRS is not going to abate a penalty typically for multiple years in a row because there's really not that many reasons that are good enough that are going to put you in a multiple year, non-compliant kind of status.
It's going to be one and that's it.
No, I think there are things that could happen that could put you in that situation, but the government doesn't happen to think the same way that I do.
So number 4 on our list out of 5 facts about the IRS that keep you up at night are tax liens.
Yeah, so tax liens are pretty serious for a lot of people. I was just talking to a gentleman yesterday that actually has a government security clearance, and he was telling me, Darrin, if I get a tax lien, I'm going to lose my clearance, and then I'm going to lose my job, and I'm going to lose my livelihood. It's going to be, the end of the world.
We've seen it with short sales, too. They can't have any deficiency or anything like that.
Yeah, so a tax lien is it's a document that's filed usually in the clerk's office of your state. It's recorded just like a mortgage or a deed or, those types of things. It's a public record. And what it does legally is it attaches to all of your property, real and personal, wherever it may be. So that was lawyer jargon, right? So it attaches to your real property, which means real estate, and it attaches to your personal property, which is everything else. Okay? So it literally attaches to, the socks and your underwear drawer. It's all the stuff that you own technically is attached by that tax lien. There's also a situation where all of your after acquired property also gets attached to the tax lien.
Wait, what was that?
So let's say IRS files a tax lien on January 1, and then you buy a car free and clear on February 1. Well, now the lien's attached to your car that you just, tried to buy or you did buy. But all you did is you took one asset, which was the cash, and you turned it into a different form of an asset. So you got to think about those things if you have a tax lien that's attached, that's filed or recorded. A lot of people think that the tax lien only attaches to the address that's on it. I hear this all the time. Oh, well, that lien's only on the house at 123 Main Street. No, that's the last known address. It's a 123 Main Street is on the lien, but it attaches to that house that you live over there on Jones Boulevard, too.
So a tax lien is a tax lien. It's like a lien on you, pretty much.
Yeah, there's one exception, and that is that real property. So real estate, the lien has to be filed in the county in which the real estate is located. Otherwise, it does not effectively attach.
Interesting little tip.
And I think that it makes sense because otherwise, if you were doing a title search, you'd have to search
you'd
have to search every single county in the country in order for that to not be the case. And so very intelligent courts throughout the years have decided that that's the rule. It has to be in the right county. And we see this a lot where the person might live in Pasco County, but they record the lien in Sarasota County for some reason, and they just kind of screw up, and that ends up benefiting the taxpayer.
Well, you're listening to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. We are right in the process of talking about 5 facts about IRS problems that will keep you up at night. When we come back, we'll dive into number 5. Back in a minute. Welcome back. You're listening to the IRS Solution Attorney Show.
That'd be me. I'm Darrin T, Mish, the IRS Solution Attorney.
And I'm your co-host, Katrina Madewell. Thanks so much for sticking with us to the break. If you missed any part of the show, it is available in its entirety in the podcast. There was a lot of really great stuff in this show.
Yeah, there's a lot of details in this
yes.
one. Right? I mean, we're not kind of like shooting the bull like we do a lot of times. Today, we're talking about the 5 facts about IRS problems that keep you up at night, and we're actually on number 5. We talked about, the first one was imprisonment. A lot of people are worried about that. The second one is a wage levy or a bank levy. Those are garnishments of your wages or your bank account. The third was penalties and interest. The fourth were tax liens. Tax liens can be really killer. They also take about 50 points off your credit report.
Probably more than that.
Yeah, it can be really detrimental. You're not going to be able to buy a house if you have a tax lien, and if you want to sell your house and you have a tax lien, you're probably going to have to pay it off.
Yes, and all those points and more will be on the podcast in its entirety.
Exactly. So now we're on number 5, which is property seizures, and you asked me about this early on in the show, and the IRS can actually seize property. So I had a case one time where I was representing a gentleman that was a sole shareholder of a corporation that was defunct, but it had a tax bill. And I asked the gentleman what assets, were left in the corporation. He says, well, only one, but it's really important to me. Okay, tell me what it is. Well, it's a red Corvette, and it's paid for. It's free and clear. And the revenue officer in this case is dying to bring out the tow truck and hook it up and take it away. I actually think to this day that the revenue officer was dying because he was going to get to drive it, And so we ended up working out a deal so that this gentleman's, Corvette, which was his baby, wasn't going to get seized by the IRS and hauled away.
So property seizure could mean a car, but I'm thinking real estate, like a house.
It can happen. Primary residence seizures actually fall under some different guidelines and rules. They actually have to be signed off on by a federal judge, which is not a huge step. To get a federal judge to, sign off on like a tax protester who doesn't pay his taxes and they own their house free and clear. But it is fairly rare. Primary residence seizures are not real popular in the public. And if it gets out in the news, how we always talk about how the IRS prosecutes people so that they can make a splash so that it scares us all.
Yes.
And then we get, we get compliant. Well, the reverse can be true if they take somebody's house. So I've actually had a couple little old lady type scenarios where the IRS was, threatening to take the house. And first thing I did was go to the media because,
yes.
I've got you,
You don't want that.
No, if you're the IRS, you don't want to, you don't want to see that. So it's pretty rare. It's usually resolved or reserved for really abusive situations, tax protester type people that don't believe in the constitutionality or legality of taxes and stuff. And they've,
it's almost like a point.
Yeah, they're trying to make an example out of you so that, other people don't do it. A lot of times people, particularly here in Florida, get the homestead exemption mixed up, right? They say, well, Florida law says that a creditor can't seize my house. Yeah, that's what Florida law says. That's true. Except for we're not talking about Florida law. We're talking about federal law here, right?
Right.
And so there's something in the supremacy clause of the Constitution or something in the Constitution called the supremacy clause that stands for the proposition that when federal law and state law conflict, guess who wins?
The trump card is going to be by the federal government.
Oh, that was a good pun.
Yeah.
Very nice.
They're going to get the trump card.
So, yeah, federal law is going to supersede state law in that situation, and so the IRS is going to be able to seize your house. It's unusual, for if you're run-of-the-mill non-filer, it's probably not going to happen, but it's, theoretically possible.
And so since this is the IRS Solution Attorney Show, we know that many people listening, Darrin, they don't actually like to call in. So we get a lot of questions on Facebook and on Twitter at Darrin_Mish, and we will answer those on the show so that you can remain anonymous. Feel free to tweet or Facebook or email questions, getirshelp.com. Also, you can leave them there. John had a question. He wanted to know, I'm a current client of yours, and I followed your advice, started to pay myself as an employee to help stay current on my tax withholdings this year. Given I still owe the IRS a lot of money, should I be concerned with them slapping a garnishment on my paycheck?
Well, remember, going back to the last segment, I think it was, if you haven't received a final notice of intent to levy from the IRS, then they cannot garnish your paycheck. So if that has happened, then potentially there could be some problems or things that we have to worry about. But if not, then you don't have anything to worry about. So I would suggest that, if you're working with us, then we're going to do what we got to do to protect you so that you don't get garnished.
Well, thank you for listening to the show, John, but call Darrin. He already represents you.
That John really narrows it down. I probably only have like 50 Johns in the database, but I'd love to talk to you about it.
So do you want to talk about our news story real quick? We got like less than a minute to do that before the train wreck, but Trump's campaign releasing the letter confirming the IRS audit? Yeah,
so Donald Trump apparently is chronically under audit, and a lot of people make a big deal out of this. I'm not necessarily a big Trump guy, but I don't think there's anything that unusual about a billionaire's, some of his businesses being under audit, because larger businesses tend to be audited more frequently. It's almost like a perpetual deal.
It's all relative.
Yeah, so I don't really put a lot of stock into the fact that, he's under IRS audit. I don't think this is politically motivated. I think there have been some audits and some situations in the last 7 or 8 years that have been politically motivated. This one, I just don't happen to think that's the case.
Well, it's about that time.
You mean time for the IRS train wreck of the week?
That's it.
Okay, so
what do we got?
This is a fun one. I represented this gentleman off and on, probably for about 6 or 7 years. When he first came to me, he owed about $500,000, I think. And we identified that because of some other situations and circumstances in his financial life, the best thing for him to do was to go and file a bankruptcy. And we talk about on the show quite often that bankruptcy can discharge taxes under certain circumstances.
I don't think we've talked about that one in a while.
We haven't talked about it in a while. And so he went through a bankruptcy with another attorney, somebody that I ever referred him to, and wiped out about $300,000, I think, of the tax debt that he owed, which was good, but he owed like $500,000. So he still owed a couple $100,000. In fact, I wrote it down here. He owed $207,358.90, just to be exact.
And I don't think he's writing a check for that.
No. So, and actually, he and his wife used to live in the Tampa Bay area, and they ended up moving up to the Villages, which is a really cool, actually, retirement community, north of Tampa.
Just don't have sex with anybody there. Sorry, I had to do it.
Yeah, thanks for putting that in my show. That's just out there floating around now. But anyway, Google it.
Just Google it. Yeah, Google it.
The Village is really kind of a cool place, and they moved up there. And the wife, in this case, was not liable for the taxes. It was only the husband. And so what we ultimately did is we filed an offer in compromise, which is it's a program that the IRS has where you can settle for less. And we ended up offering right around $5,000 on, keep in mind, $207,000 liability. And we went back and forth just a little bit. The IRS agreed to accept $9,150. And so that's a pretty good deal, right? I mean, that's 4 or 5 cents on the dollar, something like that.
The percentage of what is owed is low.
Yeah. So the nice thing is I actually follow these folks on Facebook. And it's really cool because they're obviously of retirement age because they're living in the Villages, right? And so it's really neat. I get to vicariously enjoy their retirement with them. They go on cruises and they're living, they're living the normal sort of well-adjusted retirement life, which would not positively have been possible if he still owed $207,000 to the IRS. So happy ending. There's always a happy ending to the IRS train wreck of the week.
We love the train wreck of the week. Well, you're listening to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. It was so great having you this week.
Thanks, guys. I enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. We're out.